Hello everyone, welcome back to the table. What I want to do today is talk about my experiences with character creation for Pathfinder 2nd Edition and ideas that I've collected from my group as we were making characters. Now, the too long didn't watch answer is it's a in-depth process with a lot of options that lets you really create very specific characters. Characters of permanence. All right, that's the short answer. Let me tell you what I mean by characters of permanence. Okay, so the first idea is that when I was making characters and learning and then sharing that with my group and they're making characters, this is allowing you to make characters that don't intend to die immediately. So when I say characters of permanence, I'm thinking these are like really the main characters of a story that you are creating and customizing. It's pretty amazing, and we'll talk about some of the different sections and what that means. But I keep that, and when I compare that to other games where you make a character and the creation process is very simple, because those characters probably will die. Depending on the game master, campaign, scenario, whatever you want to call it, some games, the characters just kind of die, and then you just easily make a new one to replace that one. And I don't get that feeling with Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So this really makes me feel like you are creating heroes that are meant to have impact in the world. So I think the game does a very, very good job of that. Alright, so let's tell you about my group. My group is actually made up of veteran D&D 3.5 players. That is primarily what they play and have played over the years. So coming to Pathfinder, none of my group has played Pathfinder 1st Edition or 2nd Edition. Now we can say 2nd Edition. And if you haven't seen my other videos, I've not played Pathfinder 1st Edition at all. So really, this is all new to me. But my veteran D&D 3.5 players actually found a lot of things that they understood very well. And they were asking me questions that I didn't have answers to, but are actually kind of baked into the rule set, because the one thing I know about Pathfinder 1st Edition is that was based on 3.5 and taken off, and I read that people call that kind of the 3.75. So there's actually some familiarity here to those players coming, but some new concepts for them. Alright, so the first concept for those players to grasp was rolling up or lack of rolling for your character stats, your attributes. So if we look here at the, kind of going into creating your character, it talks about your character creation overall, your ability scores. So what's interesting here is that the basic way the game works is that you don't roll for your stats. So it was funny, one of the questions they asked was, they said, well, do you want us to use the method in the book for determining stats, or do you want us to use the ability buy system? And I was like, well, actually the buying your ability scores with these the point system is actually how you're supposed to do it. The rolling of your stats is actually the option. So they came already prepared to roll stats. Now, what does that mean? Well, what I really like about the 2nd Edition is as you create your character, like you pick your ancestry, your job, a background, and you get these boosts that you can apply to your attributes. So all your attributes start at a 10. But if you pick, say, an ancestry of a dwarf, you get a bonus here and maybe a penalty here. And what I like about that is it takes away all the randomness of the dice. Okay, so I might have talked about this before, but just real briefly, what my players thought of that. All right, they were okay with that. The thing is, I've got some folks, they really like to roll the dice for stats, so it's, here is an option. But they usually roll really, really well. So they end up with characters that have like just all kinds of bonuses. Great, but some other people don't roll as well, and then they don't have as good stats. And at low levels of play, I have found that characters that have a lot of good base stats tend to perform really well because they have some bonuses that the other characters don't. Now, as you get higher levels, sometimes those bonuses start to disappear because everybody has a lot of gear and magic items and things to erase your flaws. But starting out, it can be frustrating when, this person's always hitting and doing high damage, but I'm never hitting and I barely roll good damage. Well, that's life, right? I get it. That's life. That happens in the real world. Some people are better than other people at things. But when you play a game, the game is supposed to be fun. So what I like is this point buy system, if you will, the boost, because that gives some balance with your characters. So yeah, you get to pick where your stats go, so you might still end up with someone who's really strong at certain things, but at least there's some balance between the characters, so you don't have someone who just feels totally underpowered compared to others. So again, the dice rolling method is there, but I really like the concept of buying your boosts and then maybe applying a flaw. Well, after they've thought about what they wanted, one thing I really liked about the book here, the base game, is there's a lot of options. There might not be as many races or ancestries as you might have overall, but again, this is just the first book, right, of the base system. But there's a pretty good selection: dwarf, elf, gnome, goblin, halfling, human. I think those are pretty standard. I mean, even if you just simply went with like human, halfling, elf, dwarf, that's like the main four. I was holding up 3 fingers. That's the main 4, right? So the 4. Add in a goblin for cute. I think 2 of my players went with goblins just because they sounded cute. And, then there's a gnome. And they do have differences. And then what I like on this little summary sheet is it gives you an idea of what their boosts would be, and then possibly if there's any ability flaw. So again, kind of think about the character concept you want, and then the artwork. I'll tell you what, this is some great artwork. It really helps people kind of visualize maybe what they want. So when they started looking at the artwork, they were like, oh, you know what? Maybe I want to do this over that, or let me be an alchemist over this, So the artwork I thought was really good in helping people kind of decide what they wanted to play. Then after you got your ancestry, the classes, again, there's a nice selection of classes to choose from. And what's really cool is as we delved into the specifics of classes, there's a lot of ways to customize. So you very rarely, I think, will end up with 2 fighters being the same. People are going to find things that they like and want to apply. So right out the gate, there's a lot of great selections for you. And again, this is why I was saying this kind of leads to the idea of permanence, because you're not just simply saying dwarf fighter and then hit the print button or the copy machine and hand out 3 dwarf fighters. It's like, okay, I'm a dwarf, but there's options for dwarves, which might separate my dwarf from your dwarf and my fighter from your fighter. So I really like that. Now, once you kind of have your idea in mind, this is maybe the first hurdle, the character sheet. Now again, being players that play D&D 3.5, they have complicated character sheets too. But they were looking at this going, whoa, this is a lot. There's a lot. Now, I actually found this to be a fairly good sheet. I do think I would have liked some spaces that had notes that didn't say campaign notes. That was, I tell you, the people I play with are pretty darn literal. Like for me, as I was making my character, instead of having a separate sheet of paper, whenever I had notes, I just put them in the notes. But when I suggested that to some of my players, they said, but that says campaign notes, Eddie. I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. It's just notes. You can put anything you want there. But they were very much like, well, then why didn't they just make a notes section? I was like, well, then here's a piece of paper to take notes. So, we see things a little bit different on the character sheet. But, again, for a new player, yeah, this is a lot of information. And they've got it grouped, I think, pretty good. I think it's grouped pretty good. Most things I thought were grouped pretty well. Like, I was working on a sample character, so I got some stuff written in it. It might not show up well on the camera, but like when we get into some feats and things, they've got, I think, categories. I think it's broken down. But one of the complaints was there's just a lot here. It looks very intimidating on first glance. Fortunately, I think the book does a pretty good job of showing you, like, what part of character creation deals with what part of the character sheet. That's just the basic front and back. Doesn't include the notes or spells, but you know, I think your experience with that may vary. We got through it, but I will say it is a very, very complicated sheet. I don't know if I like to use the word complicated, because what I've heard is that this is actually simpler than, because I watched another video where someone said, well, there's not as many skills. So overall, the sheet that you might have from first edition Pathfinder might be more complicated, if that's what you want to use. But it did take us a while to kind of get used to navigating this sheet. But I don't know, the more I get used to it, the more I'm seeing everything is grouped together pretty good. Your attacks are here, your defenses are here, hit point section here, perception, skills, where you put your feats. So maybe I'm just used to it now. But again, as you're going through character creation here, we're going to skip a few pages and go into probably the part that bogged us down the most, which I think is kind of weird, because in my mind, people who played D&D 3.5, there's a lot of source material for that game as well, including lots of feats, backgrounds, and things that I can only imagine is a lot, just like with Pathfinder. But for some reason, we really bogged down on what to pick. Now, with some games, when you pick a dwarf, there's a little blurb, history of dwarf, this is what they look like, here's what you get as a dwarf. Well, that's here too. Little history of a dwarf, here's what they look like, and here's what they get. But here's what they get with choices. And this really slowed us down. Being unfamiliar, it was a lot of reading and trying to pick what you want, because you get ancestry feats, or feats here. So you pick a dwarf, but you get to pick one usually. So do you want dwarven lore, dwarven weapon familiarity? Do you want rock runner, stone cutting, unburdened iron, vengeful hatred? And you pick one. Well, which one? Well, that's going to be up to you and the character that you choose. And again, that did create some differences, because I had some folks went with the goblins, and they picked different things for their goblins. So, good, bad. Okay, yes, there's options. You got to think about it. So our character creation time took a couple hours, or I don't know how long it took, but we spent a good chunk of the evening really just creating characters, because people really wanted to look at these different options and then spend time humming and hawing over, what am I going to pick? What are you picking? Well, if you pick that, I'm going to pick this. So, hey, actually, on a side, that was great. It really got people thinking about the team, how they wanted their synergy to work. But again, it all revolved around the fact that there's a lot here to choose from. And that can be a little overwhelming for people who have never played before. Obviously, if you've played the game before, you probably have a good idea of what you want. Now, some of these Ancestry feats, I don't know if that was in first edition, so some of this might be new for you too. But we got through it. I think they did pretty good with it. But again, you pick your race, and that's going to give you some ability boosts. It gives you a feat to pick. It gives you some other, like your starting hit points and stuff. And most people got it figured out pretty good, but I did have one person where we had to really help figure out like hit points, because you get your ancestry hit points, then you get modifier for your class, and then modified by your constitution. Not a problem, we're used to that as gamers, but this person, it just took a minute to try and fit all the pieces together, because that did lead to an issue. First of all, something like languages. Well, as you start reading some things, it says, hey, you might get a language, a certain amount of languages, like here, additional languages equal to your intelligence modifier. Well, the complaint was, but I haven't finished determining my stats, so how am I going to know how many languages I get? I've just picked dwarf, and dwarf didn't give me an intelligence boost, but you're telling me I get more boosts. So, like here, ability boost, constitution, wisdom, and a free one. Well, if I put my free in intelligence, that means I'm going to get one extra language. But what if I pick a wizard and I get more, So I would say the biggest thing for my one player was understanding and visualizing that you're going to come back to certain concepts of character creation often. I mean, as you level up, at some point you're going to get more ability boosts, and you might put it into intelligence. You're going to have to come back and recalculate that anyway, or you get equipment or something. So I think as a new player, one suggestion would be have a piece of paper. Like, just get a piece of paper and make notes. Like, you might want to write down. Come back to pick all my languages once I have my final stat. You know, same with like determining hit points and armor class. There are some things you don't have to calculate right this second, because you're right. You might not have everything figured out, but you don't want to forget to come back and do it. So just take some notes. And again, to me, that leads to the idea of permanency in your characters. It's not just saying, hey, I'm a dwarf fighter, here's what I need, I'm off and running. This is, here's some things that I have, I'm going to come back and solidify that as I create my character. So I am really liking that ability of customization and character building. Alright, now, after you pick your race, or ancestry, so there's a lot there to talk about, right? You got your ancestry, then you got your feats and things. And the one that was fun for my player was, chose a human, but really liked the idea of playing like a half-elf or the half-orc. They went with a half-elf. And again, that opens up a lot of choice paths at that point, because now they can pick a feat from, you know, either from the elven side or their human side, or there's some special for half, you know, like there's some half-elf feats or something like that, if I remember right. So again, it's not complicated from the point of view of, sure, pick one of these feats. It's more like, pick one of these 30 feats. Oh, well, shoot. Which one should I pick? There's so many. You know, but that's part of learning the game. I would say probably for new players, there are rules where you can come back and retrain feats and things like that. Don't forget that. Use that often. Or if you truly are just starting out and you're finding that there's just an overwhelming amount of information, let people change stuff as they play. And I've found that that actually puts my players at ease if I say to them, well, let's go with that path. If it turns out that's not what you wanted, because, you know, we maybe got a new understanding of how that mechanic works, let's go back and pick the mechanic that you wanted, or that feat that you wanted. Because again, the idea is these options are here for you to create a character that you want to play and you want to represent you in some way. So I would say, if you are new and you're not familiar with mechanics or feats and things, how it works, just allow them to change it when they realize, yeah, that's not what I thought it would do, and that's not what I want to play. Again, use your discretion, because if your party is super, you know, knowledgeable at some point, you know, make them use the mechanics of retraining and things like that. But if you're watching all of this, I do have a question, and maybe you can answer it for me. I didn't see in the book, and it probably is, but I couldn't find it, so you can point me to it though. But when you are a higher level and you get to pick a new feat, can you pick a lower level feat? Or once you pick your first level feat for something, or whatever level, third level feat, fourth level feat, you're now 20th level and it says, hey, you can pick a feat. Instead of picking that feat at the level you're allowed, can you pick lower level feats as you level up, or are you stuck? So just a curiosity thing. When I'm allowed to get new feats, can I buy lower level feats if I wanted? Why would you do that? I don't know, it was a question that was asked of me. They said, well, hey, I like this feat, but when I'm higher level, can I come back and buy this other one too? So if you have an answer to that, please let me know, especially if you have like a page number. That'd be great. Alright, so then we get to backgrounds, and there's actually a lot of backgrounds too. You know, maybe not as many as you're used to having, but for us, quite a few. But it's, again, they have a good explanation, and they're just a little bit of fluff, and they give you an ability boost, and they might give you a couple of skills, but you know, just take the time to look through them. Most people, I don't think any of them had a problem finding a background. Maybe a lot is not the word to use, but they have quite a few choices, but everybody found something that fit them very well. This didn't take very much time at all. I'd say the hurdle up to this point was choosing an ancestry, picking a feat, and then trying to start tracking, you know, your ability boosts and how that will affect your bonuses to different things. So you pick your background, it gives you maybe one or two ability boosts, and then some skills. Cool, now you've got a background. Then we get to the language part. And again, nice explanation of languages, but some people are like, okay, but I still don't know how many I get because I haven't finished making my character. Got it. Because then we got to pop on to the classes. And classes, again, nice. Little key here explains what, you get as the class. Again, maybe there's a, boost you get to pick. Here's something, your key ability, intelligence. That's important because that's going to affect like your saving throws and difficulty checks for your skill while you're casting and different things, how many hit points you get. But again, plus your constitution modifier. It's okay. It's okay if you don't have your final constitution now. Remember, you just make some notes on a separate sheet of paper, come back and recalculate that as needed. But again, gives you some ideas that you're going to get for your class. Now, as you move in, what I really like is the fact that as you are leveling up, yeah, you do get options. But a lot of times you get like maybe one thing. Or it might say you get a skill feat. But yeah, that's the problem, is so many feats. Again, I know there's not as many feats as the overall amount listed in all of first edition. This is just the first book. But there's still quite a bit. So if I go to the feats section, because that's where people spent a lot of time, was they went to the feats, there's a lot. Well, there's a lot of class information too. Classes. All right, some skills information, and then feats. Yeah, they got a list here. It's a couple pages of feats, general skill feats, and it's just page. This is the part where they really bogged down, is once they got to the class, it was then picking feats. So I might only get 1 or 2 feats, but there's so many to pick from. Now granted, a lot of the feats are level restricted, so it's not like looking at this and saying, okay, I have 300 feats to pick from. No. At first level, you only have a fraction of that. But at first glance, that can be intimidating because you don't know how to build your character, because some feats require previous knowledge of another feat. Well, if you don't know that at the time, that means what you did in your first few levels of character creation come to naught because you don't meet the requirement for a feat that you find as you leveled up. That's why, as a DM, it's nice they include a retraining in here, but sometimes I'll let people change their feats as they level up because we're not familiar with things. But anyway, yeah, so don't let that intimidate you. Just understand that you see a lot of stuff, but that doesn't always apply to you right away. This is, again, leading to that idea of permanence. You're creating a character that's meant to last, be heroic. So just go with it. Don't be intimidated. But I will say this is one thing I really liked about the character creation. There's a lot of information on the classes. Lots of games, you get 1 or 2 pages, if that, and you're off and running. Here, there's a lot of information, a lot of fluff, if you will, but important mechanics. Because again, as you get to certain levels, you're going to get certain abilities or boosts or feats or choices. Like with your alchemist, once you get the basics out of the way, boom, you get into some specific class feats. And again, there might be like 4 or 5, and you get to pick one. So it gives you options. And none of my characters picked the same class. They all picked something different. But what was neat was every time they were looking, they were like, well, I could see why this would be beneficial, or why I would like this. And that's where the question came up is, as I level up, could I pick a lower level feat in place of like a higher level feat? So if somebody knows, if it really is just as simple as, nope, you get one, and then as you level up, you pick something else. That's why you can retrain. So if you don't want Alchemical Familiar anymore, but you want Alchemical Savant, then maybe you could switch that out later. But you're not going to have both over time. So again, if somebody knows, just let me know, clarify that. I'll stop asking. That's probably the only thing we didn't quite grasp when making characters. Now, one thing that I did really like, again, because there can be a lot of options, is my wife asked this. She said, hey, here's a surgeon, or, well, she was looking more specifically, I think she was making a fighter at the time. Well, let's say we're looking at we'll find monk, because each of these have like 1 or 2. But each of the classes have 1 or 2 what I called suggestions. They're samples, like a little template, if you will. So it says, well, hey, if you want to make a crane monk, here's some ideas you could pick. Or here's a key monk, here's some ideas. And my wife said, well, if I want to make this key monk, can I change out a couple of these things? Because I didn't quite like this, but could I pick this feat instead? And I was like, yeah, this is just a sample. So I thought this was cool that they included this for you, is to show you the versatility in the creation. So just because you make a monk doesn't mean you're making a monk that matches all the other monks at the table. You're making a monk, but now you're going to make a monk specific to you. And they all have that. They all have like 2 suggestions, which I think is great. So again, you pop into, here's the, what is this? Ranger, I think? Yep, you get to the Ranger, and even then, they have, say, well, here's an animal ranger or an archer if you want to have some ideas. Because again, having all these options is great, but sometimes it's a little overwhelming for new players, but they include some play aids to help you out. So I thought that was great. So when it came to that, then, this is the part that I didn't think they did bad on this. I think the character sheet did good, because it's got it broken down. Okay, well, my Ancestry, when I picked my Ancestry stuff, is there specials? Because some, you might get infravision or something like that, or something specific to your heritage. And then you get your feat, your first feat. And see, this is why I'm thinking as you level up, if you get to a port where you could pick a 5th level feat, you wouldn't pick another 1st level feat. I think it's very specific because it's, kind of baked into the sheet. So you got to make your choices very carefully as you level up. But anyway, I think it's sectioned off pretty good. Okay, here's where your skill feats go. Here's where general feats go. Here's where class feats and abilities go. And they have lines for everything. So for me, I thought this made sense, but my one player was like, well, why? I don't know. I will say that at least for one person I know, navigating the sheet was a little tricky. And I'm honestly not sure how I would make that easier for a new player, other than to try and sit with them and help point out the sections as we find things. Because if I'm here looking at the Ranger, and I get to Ranger feats, well, now we're talking my class feat, well, right here. So, attack of opportunity, that's a fighter, but if I was making my fighter, well, I might look at the features, but my first feat, reactive shield, well, animal companion, that's going to go right there. Feat, first, boop. And when I get my second feat, second level feat, goes right there. So to me it makes sense, but I don't know. At least one person kind of struggled with this concept a little bit. Let's see, so then you get your ability boosts. And I didn't have a problem with that. I thought that was fine. You got your ability boost for your Ancestry, ability boost for the background, ability boost at your class. And then finally, after you've got your class and you've gone through, picked everything, you get like 4 free ability boosts. And then you got your ability, and then you can go back and figure out your hit points and the other stuff on your sheet, because a lot of that then is derived from armor class. That's based on dex modifiers, armor, things like that. So at some point you start to fill in the rest of the sheet, and that's where, again, kind of bogged down for us a little bit being new, is there's lots of little boxes for marking stuff. Now, I didn't have I thought it went pretty good. Most of the players, I think it went pretty good, because it would say like, okay, you're trained in this, or you're an expert here. Well, great, if I'm an expert in light armor, I just mark in the E, and I know I'm an expert. Made sense to me, so I'm okay with that. Same with like saving throws. Well, okay, I'm trained in fortitude. Fine. They even have a little reminder up here. If you're trained or untrained or whatever, here's a bonus you get. And if you are, trained or higher in something, you can add your level to the roll. So there's like little reminders up here. Great. I think the sheet is pretty functional. Tracking your spells, because we had a wizard in the group, worked out pretty good. I will say that they also had a separate sheet of paper to track I think they picked the sorcerer. So the sorcerer, I don't think had the spell book. They had innate. So I don't remember if they tracked everything here, or if they had a separate sheet and just tracked what they had I don't remember what they did, but I think overall, again, it just comes with some experience and playing with it, and you can kind of figure out how to fill stuff in. I really don't know what else to say about character creation except that we were kind of intimidated at first. But as we went through it and took time to look things up, cross-reference things, it all started to come together. You know, even when we got to equipment and we had questions, you know, I will say that shield usage was kind of a tricky thing because we had a fighter, so we spent quite a bit of time debating on what shield skills or feats to get if needed versus, say, like the two-handed fighting or something like that. I think there was one question the character... Let me go back to fighter, if I can remember this. Because again, not being familiar with the game, it's sometimes hard to know if you're interpreting something correctly. So again, as a group, we just come to a ruling, but we came to, like, there was later on here, double slice, or would you get like reactive shield? So with your shield, you don't get the armor class bonus unless you, one of your actions, you say, okay, I'm going to be actively blocking with my shield. There's some other things you can do to turn that like active. You can make that a reaction. So use your 3 actions to attack, but if someone attacks you, use reaction to raise the shield. And then there's ones where you can use the shield to actually try and absorb some damage. So there's multiple ways to use the shield depending on how you build your character. Or double slice. So my character wanted double slice. And we spent some time trying to figure out how that works exactly. But it seems like you roll your 2 attacks. If they both hit, you combine their damage, and you add up all the damage that you get. And the benefit to that is all the penalties get subtracted from that big pool of damage one time, instead of each separate attack that you normally might make having the damage deducted for each attack, right? Resistances or something like that. But we were really spent time trying to figure out, well, do you get -5 for, you know, both attacks? Because your first attack is no penalty, second attack's like a -5 unless it's like an agile weapon, then it's -4, and then a third attack's -8, and this says it takes up 2 of your attacks. But I think the intent here is that you make your attack without a penalty, but it says if the second strike is made with a weapon that doesn't have agile trait, you get a -2. So it looks like you just make your attack, and let's say they're attacking with like 2 daggers, and then you combine all your damage. But it uses 2 attacks. So if I was going to make a third attack, I would then get that big third attack penalty because this double slices use 2 attacks. So you get like 2 attacks with little to no penalty, potentially a lot of damage, and then a third attack you would have your third attack penalty. And that's kind of how we interpreted it. I don't know if I explained that well. I'm just saying this was something we debated for a while on how that should work and why I would want that over, you know, something else. Like, what's the benefit of fighting with 2 weapons if you're just fighting with 2 weapons? Well, I think this allows you to make 2 strikes without the huge penalties, you know, that add up over time. But anyway, again, with having so many things, it could be a little overwhelming for a brand new person. But if you work a problem out with the group, you know, come to a consensus, I think things work out pretty well. Yeah, like I said, I'm not quite sure what else to say. I think the biggest thing we ran into after all of this was spells. Equipment, we're used to that from playing lots of other games. Look up their traits, you know. Some weapons have traits, weapon traits, you know, agile, attached, monk. You know, it's fine. Nothing that we couldn't figure out. We did pretty good there. How many arrows come with a purchase for bulk encumbrance I'm using. I like that. They have a nice simple little encumbrance system, so we could track how much gear people could carry. It made sense to me. That's why you got to hire little, you know, hirelings to carry your stuff around. But I'd say the other part where it started to get complicated was, again, down to spells. At first level, you only get a certain amount of cantrips, only get a certain amount of first level spells. So again, your options are still kind of small. But a person can look at this and flip and be intimidated by the fact that, oh yeah, spells take up, you know, almost a good chunk of the book. And having so many options, that causes that, you know, paralysis of what do I pick? But again, once we kind of settled down and we're like, okay, well, here's your school. You know, sorcery, you get to pick your, I forget what they're called, but it's almost like picking your school. Here's your mastery that you're picking. And now you can pick first level spells, but again, only from that specific school. Then that helps the pain. You know, now you take 30 options and you narrow it down to like 10 options. So it's not as bad as we first thought. Again, it was just that initial sense of, oh my gosh, there's so much here. But again, once you kind of break it down, then it's like, okay, I'm not using all of this at once. I'm using just a small portion of what I need. But after we got through spells, then pretty much the rest of the book is like the fluff of the world, kind of, you know, some rules. So yeah, that's the basic parts of character creation. So again, sorry if you thought this was character creation, like how to do it. I just wanted to share our experiences. I'm going to try and label the video as such. That way, you know, I probably should have put a disclaimer at the start. We're just kind of talking about what we experienced. Overall, I think it went well. I would do it again. I don't mind. I like making characters. I really like making low-level characters because to me, I have the most fun with the new characters. I don't like high-level characters for some reason. I guess because at some point I feel like, you know, why bother rolling dice? You're just going to succeed at everything you do. But the new characters, that's where I feel the most friction, it feels like. But this game, again, gives you so much that you could make a lot of characters, and if you pick just different options, you're going to get different outcomes each time. Well, it makes sense if you're picking different options as you build, different outcomes. But that's what I mean, is these aren't necessarily going to be cookie-cutter characters. There's a lot in here that, you know, that's the intimidation factor. Oh, there's so much. What do I pick? But over time, as you really start to get a feel for the game, you're really truly customizing a character for permanence and not just a character for a one-shot throwaway. All right, well, I think I'll leave it there. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch. If you have some thoughts, ideas, experiences that you've had with character creation, or maybe you know, just anything you would like to share, differences between first and second edition that you have found. Again, we didn't really have anything to compare against first edition creation and second edition creation. This is just comparing maybe to other game systems we've played, but I think this went very, very well. But yeah, if you have growing pains, maybe you're coming from first edition and maybe there's something that you really don't like about second edition that they've had to change, you know, I'd be curious if you were to share that too. You know, I'm not trying to find reasons to bash because I really think it's good, but I know that other games I've played, as you go from certain editions to certain editions, it feels like a completely different game and you don't like it as much, you know, because it hampers the way you're used to playing. So I'm just curious if anybody has found that, or maybe you found things that you like. Well, anyway, just share. I really appreciate you watching. Have a good day. All right, bye-bye.